This is The Bad Batch on TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about Star Wars, The Bad Batch, Episode 11, Devil's Deal.
Do you still dream of flying?
All the time. Then I can go far from here.
My dream was for a free Ryloth. For our people to happily live in a world at peace. We have that now.
The people don't seem very happy.
Their lives, much like yours, have been surrounded by war for far too long. But we are coming through it.
Uncle Gobi doesn't think so. He says things are getting worse.
I am well aware of what your uncle thinks. He and I want the same things, but differ in our approach.
If we need to fight, I am as capable as anyone. Gobi trusts me to do my part. Why can't you?
That fiery spirit. You remind me of myself at your age. But I want more for you, Hera. Fighting. It takes a toll. My hope is that you won't ever have to live a life like mine.
Welcome back, fellow troopers, to the Bad Batch podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We've turned it all the way up to episode 11, and it is the Devil's Deal on the Bad Batch. I am one of your hosts, John.
I'm your other host this week, Derek. No Chris this week, just the two of us. Chris is taking a little holiday, taking a little break away for Loki and for the Bad Batch this week. He will be back with us for our coverage of the latest MCU movie, Black Widow, which we're covering this weekend. Really excited to talk about that one.
Yes, it was great being back in the cinema to see Black Widow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good. Natasha Romanoff.
Yes.
Doing her thing.
Yes, I love
really good.
Yeah, when we talked a little spoiler free on the last podcast on Loki, I was listening back to it afterwards, and just because she's such a master of disguise in her role as Black Widow, I love that you called her both Natalia and Natasha in one sentence, John.
That is true. Really I always call her Natalia, and it's not. It's Natasha.
Yes. But we will talk about that in full spoiler-filled detail on our podcast about Black Widow over the weekend. This time, we're going to talk in spoiler-filled detail about The Bad Batch, Episode 11, Devil's Deal.
That is true, but before we do, just a quick reminder to pop on over to our website at tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast on any Jedi or Sith loving podcast catcher of your choice. We're also over on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries, and we're over on Twitter as well at TV Pod Industries. Of course, please subscribe, support us, leave a review if you want to. All the reviews help us with the feedback, and of course, share the podcast, because sharing the podcast is sharing the love.
Yes, and there's somewhere close to 600 podcasts covering Star Wars in different guises and different forms. So, yeah, quite difficult to stand out as a podcast that's just covering Star Wars The Bad Batch. But we have been loving our listeners. We get a great listenership for this show, and we've really been enjoying talking about it.
Yeah, it's been really good, getting some great feedback on this animated series, The Bad Batch. But let us get into our spoiler-filled review. Yep. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Once again, I'll call it out. The executive producers for this show are Dave Filoni and Jennifer Corbett. This episode was written by Tamara Becher-Wilkinson. She wrote episode 5 of this series, and as we mentioned at that time, she has written episodes for shows that we've done in the past, including Daredevil.
Yes, excellent stuff.
This episode was directed by Steward Lee, who's directed I think 3 episodes so far of The Bad Batch as well. So same directors coming on board and rotating effectively on these episodes of The Bad Batch. But John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for episode 11 of The Bad Batch, Devil's Deal?
Sure. The Empire is tightening its grip on the galaxy. Led by Vice Admiral Rampart and former Bad Batch member Crosshair, they negotiate with former Republic Senator Orn Fritar to bring the planet Ryloth into the expanding Empire. Focused on power and wealth, the Senator hands over control of his planet. But Ryloth spent years fighting against the separatist forces. They gained their independence, led by freedom fighter Cham Syndulla. The Twi'lek people are reluctant to hand their planet over without his blessing. Having fought alongside the troopers in the Clone Wars, Cham endorses the deal, arguing that the clones deserve their thanks. However, elsewhere, knowing that she won't be suspected, Gobi Glee, another freedom fighter and her uncle, sends Cham's daughter, Hera, and her droid companion Chopper to spy on the new Imperial refinery. When she reports back, Gobi realizes his resistance is not over and contacts Sid, who dispatches the Bad Batch to deliver weapons to Gobi for a modest fee. Hera travels with her uncle and strikes up a friendship with Omega when she shares her dreams of being a pilot. When they return to Ryloth with their contraband weapons in tow, their ship is shot down by Crosshair. Gobi and Hera are captured by Vice Admiral Rampart, and as they are transported back to the capital, they are charged with treason at the insistence of Senator Tar. When Cham and Elena hear of their daughter's plight, they intercept the transport and fight their way through the troopers to save her. Realizing the real power on the planet belongs to the former resistance fighters, Rampart surrenders his team. But, despite being held at Blaster Point, Rampart quickly turns the table on the Syndulla clan as he signals Crosshair to assassinate Senator Tar. In the confusion, both Cham and Elena are captured as their daughter, Hera, is whisked off into hiding by her faithful droid, Chopper.
Excellent stuff. On the surface of it, the plot for this episode is similar to last week's episode. The Empire are coming in to assert their control on another new planet, lots of characters we haven't met before. And this week, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we don't have Chris with us to tell us what it's like for someone who hasn't seen Rebels or Clone Wars. This week, you've got the two of us who've seen both of those shows. Now, let's get on to Blaster Point number 1, because I've known John 16 years now. We've been together 16 years now. I know all your reactions to things. I know what all your smiles and happy faces mean. And when we see two characters appearing on screen, our Blaster Point number 1, Hera and Chopper, appearing here, I could tell the genuine glee on your face seeing these two characters. You've mentioned once on this podcast about your favorite droid in all of Star Wars, and that droid is?
It is Chopper. I have to say, this was just like a dream of an episode. Yes, C1 10p droid, or affectionately known as Chopper from Rebels, also known as Chop here by Hera, is just my favorite droid ever. He is argumentative, he's cantankerous, he's mischievous, but I love his personality. And I think so much of that, he just does his beep thing like R2-D2, but in a very different way.
Yes.
I don't really know how you would describe it. It's more like wah 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 wah.
That's exactly
that kind of thing.
It's a guttural beep.
Very guttural. But his arms provide so much expression. He's got his little pincer arms either side of his head, and his personality is just fantastic, and was just so good throughout Rebels, and to see it here, despite of that personality, or indeed just because of his personality, he is held with a huge amount of affection in the crew of the Rebels, known as the Spectres, and he's a loyal member of that rebel group in Star Wars The Rebels. So I was absolutely overjoyed to see Chopper. He's an old droid, and certainly because in Rebels they're constantly on the run from the Empire, he's really not had many chances of a good oil bath, or, that maintenance. And so, this leads him to his argumentative side, really. He certainly doesn't take any, BS, shall we say. He does his own thing. He's in his own lane, and he just does it. And he's fantastic.
Absolutely. I suppose I always kind of thought of him as, the way you see R2-D2 is probably your first droid that you've ever seen in movies, especially for us when we were growing up. And he has that kind of chirpy attitude all the time. That's the chirps and beeps are always really chirpy. It's like your cute little dog that sits on your lap and does everything you tell it to do.
Yeah.
Well, Chopper's the exact opposite of that. He's still very loyal. He's definitely your guard dog in some senses, but not willing to go with everything that you say. So more like a cat, I would say, than a dog. He certainly shows the love for the people around him. And he cares for the people around him. You can tell that, but not willing to go with every single command, at least not willing to go without being a bit grumpy about it.
Yeah, that's it. He will just leave with a grumpy beep. It's almost like you can envision him rolling his eyes as he leaves.
Exactly.
Just really great here to have Chopper in the Bad Batch.
Yeah, and I think that kind of contrast between him and R2-D2 is always, I always found that really interesting, the idea of those two characters being so central droids in this universe, effectively. But let's also talk about Hera here. Hera, another central character from Rebels, the pilot of the spaceship, the Ghost, and a main character of that series.
Yeah, so, it's really good seeing her dream about being a pilot, dream, following the birds in the sky, effectively kind of being tricked into joining that supply run that we see here by our uncle with the promise of being able to fly the ship. But that was really good. But she is an exceptional pilot in Rebels, very much can get you out of a tight situation. Great on the ship's blasters. She can maneuver her way out of most tight spots. Very Han Solo in that sense, with the Millennium Falcon. She is in Star Wars Rebels, aboard the Ghost, with her crew, the Spectres, which are made up of Ezra Bridger, who is the main character there in Rebels. Chopper, there's Sabine Wren, who is a Mandalorian. There's Garazeb Orleus. Zeb, who...
the comic relief and kind of the...
I can't remember what species he is, but it's one that has suffered significantly under the Empire. And
I just called him comic relief there. He is kind of...
He's kind of a bit like Wrecker.
He's very like
in
Wrecker.
this, And then you have the Jedi Kanan Jarrus. Also known from this series as Caleb, that escaped Order 66 whilst he was with the Bad Batch. And so this is really, really interesting because to me this feels like this could be the series where they do meet, that we will see. I've been mentioned, will we see Caleb again?
Yeah.
I think having Hera here, that potential is much increased. Whether it will happen, who knows? But I think potentially it's increased. And I think that will be really, really good. Because they do have to meet at some point, because ultimately they do have a relationship with each other. So actually it does show how a little bit further back it is here with the Bad Batch, and how, because the Rebels was always set in the, the adventures of, Ezra Bridger and the crew of Ghost. Those adventures were always set in the early years of the rebellion.
Yes.
And here, actually, it's the real nascent bit.
Even before that,
It's before that. Yeah. So, as Hera is a child here, still under, and on Ryloth with her parents. Yeah. So, in Rebels, she's a bit more nomadic, really, having been forced into that. Presumably now with this, from this event that happens in this episode. So
we may be seeing the start of that as well. And as you say, Caleb, who we saw in episode 1 of this show, the two of them fly together effectively. The two of them are part of that team. So that's a good 10 years probably between now and the start of Rebels. So it's interesting seeing this kind of starting of those two characters at least. I would presume, I think you're right, that at some point over the course of the next, couple of seasons, let's say, perhaps we may see Caleb meet up with Hera.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, the other thing here is we have Hera striking up a friendship with Omega as well. So there could be certainly that there is Hera hitching with the Bad Batch and with Omega.
Maybe.
It would be interesting now just to see how long if this is the end of that particular storyline, or whether it will go into next week.
Yeah.
Because yes, ultimately this episode is very much focused on Ryloth, on the imposition of the Imperial army and Rampart there. With the Bad Batch, really just as a side note again,
so.
and we've had one episode like this previously a bit, so I think this is interesting to see whether there's an additional arc here in the Bad Batch that revolves around Hera and Chopper.
Yeah, and certainly this is the least we've seen of the Bad Batch in an episode. They have one scene, basically, on the planet. But really nice to see someone's dreams come true. I love that moment with Hera and Omega where she tells Omega how jealous she is of her because she gets to live aboard a spaceship. That's her dream. Well, you'll be living that for quite a long time in the future, Hera.
Yeah,
So,
she really will.
I'm glad it was her dream that was realised.
And I hope that she doesn't pick the gun, the gun area, for her bedroom.
Do you know, I did feel slightly sorry for Omega when she said that as well, where she's going, here's my favourite area of the ship. I get to use it whenever we're not being chased by anybody or whenever we don't need to shoot back at anybody. It's my bedroom, basically. So I think all of us who've had large families kind of know what it's like to be pushed in and out of your bedroom when things are going on.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
I see that she's feeling that, good old Omega. But yeah, wonderful to see Hera and Chopper back.
Well, I was under the stairs like Harry Potter.
You're probably not that big, John.
I can never do Harry Potter's accent.
You did try, though. You did.
I did try
for an episode of The Fakest this year. In fact,
that is true.
I remember these things. Let's get on to the meat of the actual storyline after dealing with the wonderful shock of having Hera and Chopper back, two of our favourite characters. Let's get on to blaster point number 2. And once again, it's about the impact of the Empire and what they're having on the galaxy. I really like this kind of discussion that's going on between the former freedom fighters, with Cham and Gobi having their conversations with other people on the planet as well. But the specific conversation I really liked was, what's the point of fighting if we can't accept peace? That's our blaster point number 2. It's just a really interesting idea that if we go back in this massive war that's going on. We had the separatist army who were trying to take over planets across the galaxy. We had the Republican armies who were trying to fight back against them on many, many wars. And then occasionally we have freedom fighters like these major characters, like Cham and his wife, and most of the people of Ryloth themselves seem to have set themselves up in their military positions, as we hear early on in the episode, to fight back against the separatists. They won their battle. They've got their planet back. And now in walks the Empire going, well, we worked alongside you when we were the Republic. How about you commit yourselves to us? And they try and win them over by giving them a refinery, which is going to bring loads of jobs to them. And then they're kind of telling the army to stand down because they will have their clone troopers come in and provide protection for them.
Yeah, I think ultimately this is where I've realised the failure of the Empire and the Imperial Army is that, I kept thinking back to the Roman Empire, and they would always conscript people into the army from the places that they had conquered. So, you could, when Caesar came to Britain, for example, it wasn't just Romans that were from Rome, or what we now know as the Italian Peninsula, but it would have included from the Iberian Peninsula, Gaul, North Africa, the Middle East, all these different areas. So, because this is the main sticking point, is that they're effectively being asked to disarm, and that their own forces can't also protect the planet. I mean, so rather than the Empire sort of in a supportive role, they want to always have this dominating role. And I think as well, it's that, General Cham, Hera's dad, and Hera's mum, Eleni, are kind of saying, how can we trust these people who aren't telling us everything? They go on a visit to the refinery, and there's all military emplacements, yet they're told it's not a military facility. Yeah. And I think, even more skeptical is then Cham's brother, Gobi Glee, who really isn't buying the idea that you put down your weapons. They fought the separatists long and hard to maintain their independence, their freedom. I'm beginning to sound a little like Mel Gibson there, but ultimately, there's subjugation going on here. And I think that, you see that there is backroom dealings between Senator Tarr and Admiral Rampart. And this is not going to end well. We just know because it's the Empire. But the interesting thing is that General Cham does want to give it a go because he recognizes as a military leader the help that the clone army gave and is willing to accept them to also be protectors. And because he's experienced so much war, he wants more for Hera, that she doesn't grow up just knowing war or having to become a soldier, but that she has something different. And so he is willing to kind of take it at face value and puts his reputation behind Senator Tarr ultimately, to the crowd, to the other Twi'leks. So I thought this was really good. It's another element of, like we saw in last week's episode, but there's certainly something much more sinister here. And people you can see that with the Twi'leks, with General Cham, with his brother, with his wife, the whole planet is very skeptical here as well.
Yeah, you're right. You get that sense that, since they've given up all of their weapons as well to the Empire, that Gobi would be kind of the person, as a former freedom fighter, that'd be kind of going, well, at least we can stand up again. We can rise up again. We can take our weapons and take them down. But they've given all of that back. So they can't just rise up again if they give up all of their rights and everything that they have, they've worked so hard for. So that's why he goes to Sid to get the new weapons to start up another revolution effectively. Already he knows and he's preparing for that future, where he may have to fight back against the Empire. Interesting point that you make about the Empire, coming in with their army and leaving them behind. And that's what's not bringing the populace on side, because we know in the future that the Empire are actually going to do exactly what you said. Just like the Roman Empire, they're going to start conscripting people to bring them on board and start turning out the stormtroopers effectively.
That's true.
Within their armies.
That is true.
They will learn that lesson. And this is probably, you're right, this is the kind of lesson that they're learning from going into planets and saying, we're just going to leave half of our army behind, and you're not going to be able to have any weapons. But it's okay. We'll be able to put you into the mining facility to mine instead of protecting your planet.
Yeah, I mean, technically, actually, they don't really have too much conscription. It's just growth in a jar, basically.
At the moment, the clones,
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, but in the future with the stormtroopers,
definitely.
It'll be conscription or possibly slavery, as we also find out in the far future.
And because even in Han Solo, he's there and you see, the whole kind of Imperial Navy booths trying to recruit new fighter pilots and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to be a fighter pilot in the Imperial Army, you'll be sent off as a foot soldier with a helmet, and that's about it, really. Yeah, but no, I think this is another interesting analysis of what's going on within the Empire. But it all effectively leads to our Blaster Point 3, this return effectively from meeting up with the Bad Batch, our Bad Batch moment from the episode, them handing over the weapons to Gobi and this new resistant force. They return to the planet. And effectively, our Blaster Point number 3 is the rescue of Hera from what happens from that point onwards, really. We mentioned the Crosshair's on this planet here, and he feels like he's getting even more evil as the weeks go on. It's difficult to tell because we don't actually see their uniforms side by side with the Bad Batch and Crosshair, but Crosshair's uniform, or his outfit, his clone trooper outfit, looks like it's really been burnt. It looks like he's been colouring it in charcoal. It looks really black with no other markings on it, really, is what it looks like. Whereas the Bad Batch have all got little markings, and they all have their drawings on them and their own bits of flair that make them signify which one of them they are. Whereas Crosshair seems to be down to this dark uniform, and his voice seems even more gravelly, and he seems to be standing in the shadows more this episode.
Well, it's that dark grey which and it's the green visor, which also the stormtroopers that we've seen have also worn.
That's right, yeah.
They've not really fixed on white yet for the stormtroopers. So, but you wonder if it's getting darker and darker and darker, maybe it'll be, he will almost become a death trooper like we see in Rogue One or something like that. I don't know. But certainly, yes, the rescue of Hera, it's all, for me, you know, it's designed, it's the sinister plan, it's Admiral Rampart taking the long game to undermine the planet's democracy, or at least institutions. But ultimately, it's to do with Crosshair, you know, shooting down the ship, like you say, because he has been tailing General Cham's brother, Gobi, all the way through here. He's put a tracker onto the ship. They know that they're off-world when they shouldn't be. Their suspicions are high. And ultimately, when he shoots down the ship, it is Rampart and Senator Tarr that arrive on site. And interestingly with this, it's, you know, it's the fact that they're arrested, Hera and Gobi, but they're charged with treason without any court. And this is what ultimately, you know, jolts and pulls Cham and his wife from effectively their diplomacy, or, you know, trying to find this or the acceptance, I guess, of taking at face value what Admiral Rampart is saying. But it goes even more sinister, even deeper, this long game of Admiral Rampart, because, you know, there is a moment earlier in the episode where he and Senator Tarr are talking about, you know, we'll just play your role, and we'll be able to get Cham and his wife, and to break the insurgents as they were under the Trade Federation and the droids. You know, there's a real strong suspicion that the leopard of Cham and his wife, and I think the Twi'leks in general, can't change their spots. They'll always be freedom fighters. They'll always want to maintain their control, which is the whole reason for the Imperial control. And I guess whatever they are mining and refining here is critical for the Imperial and Galactic Empire, because they do say this will speed up the development of the Empire considerably. Is that it's military or, you know, it's resources. So I think, this is really interesting because it means that Cham and Eleni go on this rescue mission as their daughter is being transported back to the capital to save her and rescue her, basically. And this leads to kind of the second phase of Admiral Rampart's plan, where, unbeknownst to poor Senator Tarr, he is assassinated by Crosshair from afar, so that he can place that blame on General Cham ultimately as well. You know, and
it's interesting, isn't it? Because the blame that the crime that he arrests Cham and his wife for are plotting to kill Senator Tarr. He doesn't actually arrest them for murdering Senator Tarr. He arrests them for attempted murder, effectively, even though he's just been executed. So that's a really interesting one. I did like that moment with Tarr earlier on as well, just to show you how nefarious the character is, where he runs out of the ship and says straight away when he sees Hera, this is absolute proof that Cham and Eleni are involved. They are definitely back to their old ways again. You know, he is absolutely just here to keep control and get his wealth built up. We didn't really mention, but Senator Tarr is actually a character in the live action movies. He was one of the right hand men to another senator in the Republic, Senator Palpatine.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, the only thing is as well, you see a Twi'lek in Return of the Jedi as well, like this entourage of then Chancellor Palpatine. But it's obviously not Senator Tarr, and I was thinking it was. So I was really surprised when he got shot.
Absolutely.
But certainly in the prequels, you see, even as he calls himself Chancellor, and, still he hasn't revealed himself as a Sith. You see Senator Tarr there on the central dais on Coruscant behind him. Yeah.
Even without thinking that it was the same Twi'lek in future movies, I was pretty shocked at the headshot here. Like, we spent a lot of last episode talking about the fact that the Bad Batch, when they were on the last planet fighting to free the senator there, that they were using stun weapons when they were in there fighting and stuff. Whereas this time we have someone getting a direct headshot.
Yeah, right in front of everyone.
On screen. He's definitely dead. There's no way you can explain to a 5-year-old or 6-year-old who's watching their Saturday morning cartoon what that is, other than saying, well, he's gone now. And so I thought it was surprisingly brutal, because we did see the hole in the head as well. It wasn't...
Yeah,
I was quite surprised at that after all of our discussions last week. That's why I was so surprised.
Yeah, and I guess... It ultimately ends with Rampart taking control again and arresting Cham and Elena. But luckily, Elena is quick-witted and tells Chopper to take Hera to safety in one of the land speeders, just in the nick of time, because 3 other clone ships come in to these reinforcements following the headshot by Crosshair. So we see her as her parents are being taken away, that they're in a hiding spot in Ryloth.
Yes, we do. And do you want a tiny spoiler for next week, John, before we close out this episode on that point, on that moment? It's just the title of next week's episode.
Go on then.
Next week's episode's called Rescue on Ryloth, so we'll pick up directly from this episode. So 2 things we've had this week that we didn't have last week in last week's episode. 2 things we had. We have all the knowledge of watching Rebels and Clone Wars, which really helps in these kind of episodes. And we also know this story will definitely continue next week as well.
That's great stuff. I did not know that.
That's quite cool, isn't it?
I didn't know the next episode title, so yeah, that's great. Because I think it really would work. And that's very exciting, because I'm really happy to be back with these characters of Hera and Chopper. And also because in Rebels, we do meet her parents, as well, in one of the seasons. I can't remember, because there is that tension, that built up between, herself and her dad, because we do see this here. She is more aligned with her uncle Gobi. She wants to be that freedom fighter. She wants to help out her uncle. She's doing reconnaissance at the refinery.
Yeah.
She tells Chopper to cover for her on the promise of flying the ship to pick up the contraband supplies of weapons. And ultimately she's going to be, on her own and left. So I think there is kind of a healing episode in Rebels, between her and her father.
Right.
And it's coming from the fact that, General Cham did try to accept the Imperial control of their planet because of the many years of war.
Okay,
and he wanted the planet to experience peace and to build on the peace.
Okay. That seems very well tied into the theme of this episode and what was going on in this episode overall. So let us see if that plays out a little bit more next week.
Yeah, that'd be great stuff.
Anything else you want to make a note of before we close out our discussion on the Bad Batch episode 11, John?
The only other note I had, I really liked when Hera was describing about how she flies. She had just been shown all the different controls by Omega on there, and she goes, yes, you use the technology and the controls to help you, but ultimately you're free. You're the one that it's through feeling the ship and how you move it. And Omega says this to Tech, who just goes, what feelings? Like, for him it is using the Navi computer. Yeah. It is the hyperdrive. It is all this technology.
Literally learn the buttons and press them. Yes.
So I really like that as well, actually. Yeah. Tech as well. Yeah. As you say, will only teach her to fly once she knows the spec of the Havoc Marauder
without using the manual. I thought that was really good. And she can recite them all by heart. That's a real tech moment. There's two great moments with Chopper in the episode as well that I just really enjoyed. The first one where we see Hera looking at the sky and enjoying the sunshine and mimicking
while she's doing intel.
Mimicking what it would be like to fly a ship in the sky, and Chopper's supposed to be watching her six, and making sure that nobody sneaks up on her, but of course he's looking in the wrong direction, and we have that instant reaction from Chopper, kind of going, oh no, I've done something wrong here. I thought that was really good. And when he goes to tell Hera's parents about her being captured, I just love, again, you can feel within the performance of Chopper, like you always did with R2-D2, you can feel what he's trying to say, even though you can't understand any words.
Yeah.
And I think that's a particular skill of Star Wars writers, to be able to write characters that you can't understand a word of, but understand what they're saying.
And the sound engineers for picking the right intonation or pitch or sequence of beeps or grunts or whatever it is. That really conveys something. And he also does have his little mini sort of T-Rex arms.
He does.
Which is another thing, that is very expressive with Chopper.
Absolutely. And we should also say that Chopper was originally voiced by Dave Filoni, in Rebels. There was a credit for that, but now Chopper is played by himself.
Excellent stuff.
There you go. He's getting his own credit and finally getting the respect he deserves.
Droid recognition, just as was required and just as was the case, the upheaval in Droid land in Solo.
There you go. The revolution is coming.
The revolution is coming. But I think that's all for notes. On to what you thought. Derek, what did you think of Devil's Deal, episode 11 of The Bad Batch?
I loved this episode. I really did. I absolutely loved it. I got to the end of it going, oh, wonderful adventure with Hera and with Chopper, and get to see a bit of their past, a bit of their history. And it was only at the end that I realized, oh, there's lots of people who don't know who those characters are. And, I wonder what their enjoyment is going to be of this episode. I thought it was a really fun adventure. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know the characters, you're introduced to them at the start and it's just an adventure. It does feel odd that the Bad Batch are only in the episode for a minute and a half, really.
Yeah.
Of course, arguably, Crosshair is still a Bad Batcher. That's where he started, so he features a bit more prominently in this episode. So, arguably, it's still a Bad Batch episode, of course, for that reason. But I'd really be interested to hear what someone who doesn't know those characters, what they thought of this episode. Was it exciting enough? Did they give you enough to go on? Because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really well structured episode and really fun and great to see some characters that I love.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Cham? What did you think of this episode?
I loved it. I'd give it 4.5 choppers out of 5.
Nice.
I think for me, just having Chopper there, I'm going to elevate my thoughts on this episode and along with Hera. But it was great getting Hera's backstory. I guess it's very similar to what's happening in the galaxy at the moment with the Empire consolidating and forming. But it's great having that backstory to Hera from Rebels, in much more, in a contemporary way, of her when it's the flashback ultimately, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
hard, isn't it, when you know a character in the future? It's hard to describe. So that it's kind of like we know her foreground.
Yeah, exactly. It's the flashback, but I mean, coupled to all that, I really like seeing Rampart here. It feels like he is the brains of this consolidation of the Empire in the galaxy.
God, he's got that smarmy politician
he
bit about
he
him
does.
as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got the long game. Along with Admiral Tarkin, who becomes Grand Moff Tarkin, whether there was some kind of political kind of sort of chess game between these two, because they seem very, very able, and he certainly knows how to play different planets off from one another, and he's certainly got this long game, but it's also, he's certainly not shy from using political assassination to achieve his goals as well. Absolutely. So, and as a pretext for further sort of consolidation and, dare I say it, strangulation of planets. So I thought this was really, really interesting in that. I love seeing Crosshair. You know, he is becoming, I guess, just really very much Rampart's sidekick here as well. Very much willing to do his bidding. I kind of like the idea that the Bad Batch flew in to do the supplies, and there was that brief moment. It was a nice little touch point. But ultimately, I really liked the action. I loved the motivations of Hera and her dad and her mom and her uncle in this kind of fight, and the varying sort of motivations, ultimately being sort of tossed around really, and changing. I thought it was really, really good. So I give this 4.5 choppers out of 5.
Very good. Very good. We were going to say that we didn't have any feedback because of the massive release on Disney Plus of Black Widow. I know when we were trying to actually watch the episode at 8 a.m., Black Widow had just been released and we had 2 crashes of Disney Plus. So we thought lots of people would be able to watch the episode in time to send their feedback. But as always, our wonderful fellow troopers have sent us in some feedback. First up, Victor sent us an email to say, "Greetings, John, Derek, and Chris, and fellow troopers. I was surprised to see pre-Rebels Hera. I can already see in her the formidable pilot she will become. If Filoni did a what-if episode, I'd like to see an adult Omega join the Rebels. It would seem there is little hope of rehabbing Crosshair. Good thing he wasn't tailing Gobi when he met with the Batch. Perhaps opponents of the Empire should regularly scan their vessels for trackers. Apparently, though, many series and films, no one adopted that practice. What is the Empire up to on Ryloth? I have a feeling the Batch will be caught up in this. The big question is, what is Filoni up to? Enjoying the series, your podcast, and trooper feedback. Cheers, Victor Von Doom."
Thanks so much, Victor. Totally agree with you. You know, why are they not scanning for trackers? There should be some scan built in to the ships. So that they can check that. It's interesting. I'm wondering if there's something we've missed about Ryloth and its importance to the Empire, for sure. Maybe, you know, cause that's kind of a specific point in this episode where, Eleni says, you know, is this a military installation? So who knows?
I feel like whatever it is that they're using the refinery for is a very important metal or a very important material for the Empire, and that's why it's so important to them. And also the fact that it's really easy to get in with the Senator here, and they need more planets to join the Empire after the Republic has fallen. So
that is true.
Yeah,
that is true.
It's that.
I reckon as well, a what-if series in Star Wars could be also very interesting.
It could be, and you never know. There's so many series coming up that could be definitely a possibility. Thanks so much, Victor.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. Over on our Facebook group, Dr. Bob Phillips says, "Well, I enjoyed that an awful lot. I have 3 questions. What is it with this universe and child soldiers? Doesn't matter if they're green and have great head tentacles. It's still wrong. 2, do all droids speak the same language and it's just a common second tongue to folks? And 3, how come the massive engines that can propel the spacecraft across interstellar distances don't give enough downdraft to shake a space scarf, let alone need serious standing up to? Nice story to advance things a bit more and broaden our understanding of the rebellion, I think, and maybe placing the Bad Batch on the side of good, mostly." Yeah, great stuff, Bob. Thanks for that. Yeah, I guess everyone is just automatically, sort of taught droid speak. It's interesting that the droids don't speak the language of, the particular planet, but, I guess it's just a universal thing.
Do you know, I remember back watching, I think Empire Strikes Back was my first ever Star Wars film, and I always thought that the reason why Luke could communicate with R2-D2 is because he had his headset display and it used to translate it into the common speak or the common tongue effectively. But they've really done away with that over the years, where a droid will talk to a human or another character and they'll instantly be able to understand the clicks and beeps and what they mean. I don't know. Maybe they've all got little earpieces in their ears, to convert it into their normal tongue. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's,
all got implants.
I think it's just one of those unspoken sort of rules that people can understand droid beeps.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, certainly child soldiers feature heavily here. I even think, you know, we've just watched Black Widow, the idea of child soldiers there as well. So, I mean, I think it's one of those I guess for a writer, the idea of the innocence of childhood, but in a situation where they're forced to defend themselves or they become embroiled into a struggle or a war, as I think, it's probably quite powerful to some extent. And I think there's a lot that can be played around with people's assumptions and actually, push the limits of of their boundaries of what they think is right. It's interesting in an animation because it takes on maybe it softens it some more, but certainly I think, child soldiers are certainly a thing, even on this planet.
That's true. Yeah. Like it is unfortunately a realistic, depiction in a war zone. We know it from Africa. We know it from Iraq and Iran. We know it from a lot of the, places around the earth where we've seen wars that child soldiers are conscripted and involved, in these situations. I suppose the freedom fighters' way of explaining it is that the war affects everybody on the planet, regardless man, woman or child. So they will use any advantage that they have. And in this case, we see in this episode that Gobi is using Hera because she wouldn't be suspected because she's a child. And that unfortunately is the excuse that a lot of freedom fighters and terrorists will use, to use child soldiers.
And you're right. It's still wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It is still wrong. It is still wrong, but unfortunately a reality. As for the engines, I think in the same way that the droid speak is accepted, that everybody understands it, I think in the same way the Star Wars universe, the engines themselves can aid a landing without killing people that are close by effectively. It seems like they potentially aren't using the same kind of engines that are used to propel them across massive distances. They're using a different sort of propulsion system when they're in planet.
I guess they have different modes. It's a bit like the cars that you can turn on sport mode and it increases the revs and all this kind of stuff. I guess a ship needs that different function. A bit like with the Enterprise where you see it docking. It needs certain little thrusters, but then it has its big engines for going interstellar.
The nacelles, John.
Yes.
Brought me back to Star Trek there for a second. Thanks so much, Bob. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode as well. And I really wanted to hear from, as I said, at least some of our fellow troopers that haven't seen the other animated series to see if they enjoyed this episode. Good stuff.
Thanks, Bob.
Also on Facebook, Maria Pereira Granata says, "It was great to see a young Hera and Chopper. Chopper is my son's favourite robot. Hera is a great pilot and leader of a group in Rebels. Not sure at what point she meets up with Caleb or Kanan, as we know him from Rebels." Thanks, Maria. I think your son and John will get on really well, since it's also his favourite robot.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
My inner child is certainly there with Chopper.
Exactly. We know from Rebels that Hera and Kanan do meet up well before they have an established relationship when it gets to Rebels. So they will meet up sometime between now and the start of Rebels, which is potentially 10 or 15, or 10 years or so. I think a couple of years at least.
So who knows?
So there's a possibility we'll see them meet up in the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Maria, for the feedback. Great to get everyone's thoughts and comments through, on this week's episode of Bad Batch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so again, it's a big thanks to our fellow troopers for joining us. Remember, quick shout out, please support us, subscribe to us, share the podcast. Sharing the podcast is sharing the love. We're over on Patreon at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. If you want to subscribe to us there on a monthly, with a monthly amount to support the podcast, you can do that also. Or if you want to support us with a one-off contribution, we're over on buymeacoffee.com/TVPI, where you can do that as well. But however you support us, it is always very, very much appreciated by us here on TV Podcast Industries and on all the podcasts that we do. Without the support, in whatever form it comes, we would not be able to function, I guess. And that goes with the feedback from the community as well. So please send in your feedback on the episodes of The Bad Batch.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you who've been buying me a coffee over on buymeacoffee.com/TVPI, including Derek and Victor, who both bought me a coffee this week. This week's editing of 3 full episodes of the podcast is being brought to you by Derek and Victor. Thanks to their support. And thanks to everybody else who's been supporting us over on Patreon and in all of the other ways that you've been supporting us.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Victor and Derek, for that. But we will be back next week with our discussion about Star Wars The Bad Batch, Episode 12, Rescue on Ryloth, which airs on Disney Plus from Friday, the 16th of July. We will also be releasing our final discussion podcast of Loki, Episode 6. That will be next week. And of course, as Derek said, up front on the podcast, we will be discussing the recently cinematic release of Marvel Studios' Black Widow.
Long-awaited Black Widow, I'd say. 7 years since it should have been released, and a year and a half since it was ready for release, yes. I would say.
I think so, indeed.
Thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you again next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, fellow troopers, for joining us. It is, as always, a great pleasure. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep trooping.
Bye.
Bye.
What did you find out? Guilty of treason.